Hello, everyone. We've been looking at some of Joel Goldsmith's ideas on living the infinite way. And today I'd like to share with you some of his ideas of God as an operating law. In this chapter, Goldsmith writes, probably the idea that we like best of all to entertain is the idea of God as love. About 400 years before the birth of Jesus, Socrates recognized that God's love is known by his law. At some time on our spiritual journey, it becomes necessary to ponder the idea of God as law. And in so doing, we discover that we must give a lot of attention to that idea if we are to bring our lives into harmony, wholeness, and completeness, into oneness or at one-ment with truth, with love. He writes that the science of electricity is governed by the law of electricity, and one does not set up an electrical wiring system without first knowing that law, because any violation of that law will result in someone getting hurt. This is also true of the law which is God. Disregard of the law of God causes suffering from disease, discord, lack, and inharmony. Most do not realize that there is a law in operation much greater and more powerful than any law ever written into the statutes of any nation. The Master Jesus, we believe, knew the entire secret of the relationship existing between God and man, and also knew that the way to bring about harmony in man's existence was through understanding the law of God. The Apostle Paul clearly states, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap." If some of the things we have reaped in our experience were actually the reaping of what we ourselves have sown, then we are being called upon for a complete reorganization of our lives, our state of thought, and our state of consciousness. Paul goes on further, showing us how to improve our sowing so that our reaping will become more in accord with harmony. He writes, "For he that sows to his flesh shall reap of the flesh, but he that sows to the Spirit shall reap of the Spirit life everlasting." Paul shows that it's because God is spirit, the laws of God are spiritual. If we have been accepting and entertaining material law as our basis of life, we're what he calls sowing to the flesh, and we are bound to reap a finiteness, limitation, and inharmony. But by keeping our minds, our thoughts, and our feelings completely on God as source, we are reaping to the Spirit, and only those things of the Spirit can be manifest for us. Goldsmith goes on to talk about forgiveness in his chapter. He writes, "In holding someone in condemnation, you are sowing to the flesh, and you will reap from that sowing. But in not blaming another, you withdraw from that sowing. Now is when we acknowledge that no one on earth, in heaven, or anywhere else has the power to restrict, harm, or influence you in any way. Now acknowledge that all power resides within your soul, and you will again be sowing to the Spirit, and you will reap freedom, peace, and harmony." Goldsmith writes, "Please understand that you are not being given a teaching of examining your thoughts to see what errors you were thinking today or yesterday or 10 years ago and correcting it. On the contrary, this is a teaching in which you acknowledge that material thinking must produce material conditions, but spiritual awareness, abiding in the spiritual word, and letting the word abide in you, will produce spiritual fruit. You can forget all of the past erroneous thinking and just begin fresh at any given moment to wipe out all the discords and inharmonies due to accepting or having accepted materiality as truth. By turning to the Spirit, you begin at once to reap harmony, health, wholeness, and completeness. It's that easy. If we place our faith in men, women, governments, organizations, we will reap all the disappointments, unease, limitedness that come from having trusted man who is limited in his own right. Whereas if our complete reliance is on the infinite invisible, the governing spirit, we will find ourselves being governed harmoniously in the outer picture. Our supply, even though it seems to come through people, is actually coming from the infinite invisible of our own being, the kingdom of God within us. If, even while accepting our supply from employers or investments, our love from others, we reserve a place within our consciousness for the realization of, yes, but my dependence isn't out there. And since I know that the kingdom of God is within me and it is the source of my supply and love, then we are sowing to the Spirit and we will reap our spiritual supply forever. By sowing to the Spirit, we will reap spiritually, and our income and supply will continue, even though it may have to come through different sources over time. Appreciation, reward, gratitude, love, and supply will never be withheld. As we sow spiritually, as we reserve this little area of our consciousness for the constant recognition that all appreciation, gratitude, and love are in the kingdom of God within us, we reap our spiritual good. And this is not all just about our finances. When we realize that this infinite spirit or soul really governs and controls our physical and mental capabilities also, we shall never lose them either. Once we understand that our physical and mental faculties are really activities of the soul, and that the body is just the instrument of the soul, the body will be as immortal as the soul, as useful, as vital, and as healthful as the soul. As we think of our experiences of the past and the present, we will find that there are many ways in which a greater love for our neighbor can flow through us. And in doing so, we open ourselves to the flow of Spirit in our abundance and our health. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself is one of God's commandments. But that love does not stop with our neighbor. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Is there any way to love God except by loving mankind, loving our neighbor? Not really. Therefore, the only way we can love God with our whole heart and soul, with our whole mind, body, and being, is by loving all of mankind. The more we can realize God to be the law of our neighbor, God to be the sole substance and governing influence, the supporting and supplying principle of all of our fellow man, the more we are loving our neighbor as ourselves, and at the same time loving God. You are being called to place your hope, your faith, your reliance, your confidence, and your allness in spirit, in the infinite invisible, instead of in the many forms in which the invisible appears. Goldsmith writes, we must learn not to try to bring God down to us, to mold God into our will and whim, but rather we must seek to understand His law and will and bring ourselves into harmony with it. Abraham Lincoln once stated, I am not so much concerned as to whether God is on my side as I am in being sure that I am on God's side. So it is with us. Let's not be concerned with bringing the power of God into our experience, but let's be concerned with understanding the law and the will of God and bringing ourselves into harmony with it. Have a beautiful, harmonious day, everyone, and lots of love.